Between 1792 and 1800, more than 400 enslaved men, women, and children labored to raise what would become the most recognizable building in the United States. Their names were erased from ledgers, their bodies consigned to unmarked ground around the District of Columbia, and the omissions were not accidents, but policy. In 1901, during work beneath the East Wing, a crew uncovered something that forced the superintendent to halt excavation and swear the workers to silence. By evening, the discovery was reburied, its traces erased as efficiently as the people whose lives it implicated. What lay in the soil suggested that the building of the president's house involved more than exploitation. It involved a systematic concealment of deaths the young republic could not afford to acknowledge. To see why those bones were so dangerous, one must return to the beginning, to the decision to raise a national palace on swamp land and the decision to pay for it with human lives. In 1790, Philadelphia served as the capital, but the Residence Act mandated a new federal district along the Potomac. In January 1791, George Washington selected a 10-mile square carved from Maryland and Virginia. Malarial flats threaded with creeks, humid summers, and tobacco plantations tilled by enslaved labor. The commissioners appointed to oversee construction confronted an immediate obstacle. The federal government had little money. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson proposed an elegant solution on paper and a brutal one in practice. Hire enslaved workers by paying their owners a monthly fee. The enslaved would receive neither wages nor meaningful care. The Irish-born architect James Hoban submitted plans in 1792, and Washington enlarged them by a fifth, guaranteeing the need for more labor, more stone, more time. Notices went out across Maryland and Virginia, inviting masters to hire out people they owned to the federal project. The government promised to return workers unharmed. That promise meant little. By November 1792, roughly 150 enslaved people had been assembled. Their owners' names appear plainly in ledgers: Daniel Carroll, Notley Young, Samuel Davidson, William Brent, while the workers appear as first names or none. Tom, 23, Peter, 19, Negro boy, perhaps 14, Len, over 50. The first winter brought clearing, draining, and digging, waist-deep in freezing muck with nothing but shovels and will. Letters note difficulties with the Negro labor due to weather and the sudden replacement of 3 men without explanation. One man named Isaac, a skilled carpenter hired out by Samuel Hanson, appears in records through November 1794, then vanishes. Another, the quarryman Peter Lennox, enslaved by Martha Custis Peter, supervised dangerous stone-cutting at Aquia. His name is marked reliable and skilled through 1796. Then, like Isaac's, it disappears. Such vanishings thread the record like missing teeth. Sudden name substitutions, payments continuing under a different first name, silence where a body should be. Pressure came from above. Washington wanted completion before leaving office in 1797. The commissioners' anxious correspondence translated into grinding schedules: dawn to dark in fair weather, double crews on the foundations, straw on rough floors in thin wooden barracks, salt fish and cornmeal for food. Disease was constant: malaria, dysentery, fevers. A June 1793 note laments that the flux has taken hold, cutting the available workforce by a third. Medical care, when provided, was inferior to that given free white laborers whose names, surnames, wages, and injuries were recorded with bureaucratic care. A Scottish stonemason, Colin Williamson, kept a private diary that pierced the euphemisms. He wrote of bleeding hands, infections ignored, and a scaffolding collapse in 1794 that left 2 black men unattended for an hour while the white injured man received immediate care. After that summer, ledgers swap Ben for Jim, payments continue, and the silence resumes. By 1795, the shell stood, but the workload broadened to roads, quarries, kilns, and mills. The workforce peaked in 1798 at perhaps 400 to 500, most of them enslaved. Language in official papers grew vaguer. Workers hired, contracted labor, servants, as if words could sand down the truth. Washington visited the site, his diary registering dimensions and deadlines, but not the human beings whose bodies hefted the stone. Free immigrants from Ireland and Scotland earned wages and left a paper trail that could be followed home. Enslaved laborers left little but first names and gaps. Some tried to leave more. In 1796, Hoban noted faint markings on a set of stones, initials and names scratched shallowly into the cream sandstone. The commissioners instructed him to turn the marked faces inward so they would never be seen. Those were signatures. P.L. Isaac, small acts of defiance and presence, a wager that the stone would remember when the ledgers refused. The wager paid out only in fragments. During Theodore Roosevelt's 1902 renovation, plaster removal exposed inward-facing stones with letters a worker sketched before being told to cover them again. Like so much else in this story, the proof surfaced briefly and was quickly buried. The hottest July anyone could recall arrived in 1797, and with it, catastrophe. Letters multiply requesting replacements, while omitting mention of the men and boys replaced. Williamson's diary speaks of a shed near the old kiln, where the sick were warehoused in obscene heat and left with almost no care. He wrote of a young enslaved girl, hardly 16, trying to cool foreheads with water and rags. Days later, the shed stood empty. No wagons had come. No one said where the men had gone. A plantation owner, William Brent, demanded the return of 5 people he had hired out. The commissioners admitted their deaths in a defensive reply that named no graves and ceased the rental payment as if settling an account. Other owners complained of disappearances and summer fevers. A careful 19th century estimate, reading the gaps and substitutions, placed the likely death toll at dozens. Comparisons to similar projects suggest perhaps more. Where were they buried? That question leads back to 1901. 6 feet below the east wing, workers found skulls and long bones mixed in churned earth. There were no coffins, no markers, no rites. The superintendent, Henry Reed, recognized both the human and the political meaning and ordered the remains reburied exactly where found. The work shifted, and the men sworn to silence. In his private diary, he recorded an old worker's words, stories of the forgotten ones, and his own nausea at laying them back into the ground and turning away. The pattern had precedent. An 1867 steward's letter described a similar discovery and a similar quiet reburial. A late 19th century government historian drafted a chapter on deaths and suppression that was struck before publication. A granddaughter's handwritten account preserved her grandfather's memories of blistered hands, secret night burials, and a friend named Peter who scratched his name into stone so someone, anyone, might one day know he had lived. Across the 19th century, official histories celebrated skilled craftsmen and laborers brought together by the commissioners, language that transmuted coercion into collaboration. Newspapers profiled renovations without asking who built the original walls or what it cost them. Even when the truth surfaced, in a quarry ledger, a family diary, ground-penetrating surveys a century later, deciders routinely concluded that excavation, literal or moral, would be too sensitive, and the earth was closed again. Truth did not die here by one grand act of censorship, but by 1,000 reasonable decisions. A superintendent not wanting scandal, a historian not wanting to lose his commission, an overseer not wanting delay, a clerk preferring servants to enslaved. Each choice made the next easier. Together they erased people whose labor underwrote the nation's symbol. The President's House opened in November 1800, with John Adams the first occupant and Thomas Jefferson to follow, bringing enslaved labor from Monticello to maintain the grounds and kitchens. The final report praised vision and proportion and thanked the craftsmen who brought the building to life, without naming the majority who received no pay, no protection, and in some cases, no marked grave. Yet traces remain. They live in the shifted diction of the commissioner's papers, in the sudden stoppage of a first name in a ledger column, in a July heat wave that moves through diaries like a spell of grief, in initials turned inward where only repairmen would ever see, in rumors handed down through families who pointed at the gleaming facade and said softly, "We built that, and some of us never came home."
To walk those grounds with clear eyes is to accept that the building is both symbol and witness, a testament to the ambitions of a new republic and to the lives it consumed to realize those ambitions. It is to recognize that history's smooth surfaces often conceal rough foundations, barracks thrown up in mud, scalps prickling with fever, a girl with a bucket and a strip of linen, a mason ashamed of what he could not change, a superintendent who chose quiet over truth, and a generation that learned to admire the stone while forgetting the hands. The lesson is not merely that suffering occurred, most empires are built on such knowledge, but that the record was shaped to make the suffering disappear. The names carved into stone answer that editorial choice with stubborn materiality. They whisper from the dark side of blocks and the shallow trenches of old foundations. We were here. We cut and carried. We set the courses and lifted the scaffolds. We bled. We died.